Part 1, The Silent Journey. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, casting streaks of light across the polished marble floors. Marcus Richardson, a tall, 58-year-old black man with dark hair streaked with silver and a simple, dark gray suit, was dragging a small suitcase through the baggage claim area. With his confident gait and sharp eyes that scanned his surroundings, he was no different from any other business traveler hurrying through the airport on a Tuesday morning. However, Marcus Richardson was no ordinary businessman. He was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who had just flown in early from Washington, D.C., to Atlanta for a top-secret meeting with local law enforcement agencies about an upcoming counterterrorism operation. Richardson had deliberately chosen to fly a regular commercial flight rather than use a government plane or travel with a large security entourage. This was his way of doing things, sometimes traveling on his own, mingling with the crowds to see how the security system worked for ordinary citizens. He believed this helped him maintain a realistic view of the challenges his agency faced. Washington to Atlanta, 90 minutes in the air, nothing special, he muttered to himself as he walked out of the baggage claim area. Richardson checked his watch, a simple Tissot, not the luxury many in his position would wear. It was only 7:30 a.m., more than an hour before the FBI Atlanta field office car would pick him up. Richardson decided to stop at a coffee shop in the airport to review some documents before the meeting. He ordered a cup of black coffee and sat in the corner of the cafe, where he could take in the surroundings, a habit ingrained in his work after more than 3 decades in law enforcement. As he sipped his coffee, Richardson scrolled through encrypted messages on his special phone. His dark brown eyes were focused as he reviewed the details of the upcoming operation. After a few minutes, he put the phone in his inside pocket and pulled out a small notebook to jot down notes. Richardson still preferred pen and paper for his most important thoughts, a classic habit that younger colleagues often joked about. Part 2, The Encounter. After finishing his coffee and jotting down some ideas, Richardson decided to take a walk around the airport to stretch his legs. He left his suitcase in the luggage storage and carried only a black leather briefcase containing important documents. Walking down the wide corridors of the airport, Richardson carefully observed the security measures being deployed, a habit that could not be broken by his profession. While passing a department store, Richardson noticed 2 airport security officers rummaging through the backpack of a nervous-looking Middle Eastern teenager. He slowed down, observing the situation discreetly. The teenager seemed confused and did not speak fluent English, while the security officers were quite aggressive. Richardson decided to approach closer, not as FBI director but simply as a concerned citizen. Before he could get there, however, a voice called out behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Please stop and put your hands up." Richardson turned to see an airport police officer, his hand on his gun holster, looking at him suspiciously. He was a white man in his 40s, slightly overweight, with a neatly trimmed goatee and cold blue eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" Richardson asked calmly, not raising his hands as requested. "I'm asking you to put your hands up and stand against the wall," the officer repeated, his voice firmer, his hand already gripping the butt of his gun. Richardson stood still, knowing full well that there was no legal reason for him to comply. "I won't do that unless you tell me why you're stopping me." The officer's face was red with anger. "We're investigating a report of a suspicious man observing security measures. You fit the description." "And what's that description?" Richardson asked, even though he already knew the answer. The officer hesitated. "A tall black male in a gray suit, observing security checkpoints." Richardson looked the officer straight in the eye. "I'm a passenger walking through the airport, and I have no legal obligation to explain my actions to you unless you have reasonable suspicion that I'm committing a crime. Me walking through and looking around is not a basis for that." At this point, a second officer, a younger, tall, and thin white man, had arrived, standing next to his colleague, ready to intervene. "Sir, we're just doing our job," the second officer said. "If you have nothing to hide, just cooperate and this will be over quickly." Richardson shook his head. "I understand your duty, but I also understand my rights. You have no legitimate reason to detain me, and I refuse to be treated as a suspect simply because of the color of my skin. The incident began to attract the attention of passers-by. Some passengers stopped, took out their phones, and began recording the situation. For the last time, hands up and against the wall, the first officer ordered, his voice rising, his hand now unholstered but still held low. Richardson remained calm but unyielding. No. I demand to speak to your superiors immediately. All right, you've made your choice, the officer said, and stepped forward, clearly intending to arrest Richardson. The second officer stepped forward, his hands on the handcuffs on his belt. It was then that Richardson decided to reveal his identity. Stop, he said, his voice full of authority. I'm Marcus Richardson, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If you touch me, you will be charged with assault on a federal official in the performance of official duty. The first officer snorted, clearly unconvinced. Yeah, and I'm the President of the United States. Richardson slowly reached into his inside pocket, moving slowly and deliberately so as not to be mistaken for drawing a weapon. I'm going to take out my identification. Don't do anything stupid. The second officer, looking more confused, took a step back, but the first kept his gun pointed down but ready to raise it. Richardson pulled out his signature red FBI identification card with a shiny gold badge and held it up. As I said, I'm Marcus Richardson, Director of the FBI. You're making a terrible mistake. Part 3, The Truth is Revealed. The younger officer was the first to realize the gravity of the situation. He quickly ducked his head and stepped back, but the older officer was still suspicious. Let me take a good look at that badge, he demanded, still not holstering his gun. Richardson held his ground, not moving toward the officer. You can come here and look, but I suggest you holster your weapon first. I guarantee you that if you continue down this path, your career will be over by lunchtime. The officer's gaze wavered between Richardson's face and the badge in his hand. Finally, with a weary sigh, he holstered his gun and stepped forward to check the badge. As he studied the badge, the color drained from the officer's face. Not only was the card genuine, but it also made it clear that the man before him was indeed the head of the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. I'm sorry, Chief, the officer stammered, suddenly sweating. We don't know. Obviously, Richardson interrupted, his voice as cold as ice. I want your names and badge numbers, and I want to see your commander immediately. By then, a small crowd had gathered around, many still recording on their phones. The younger officers were clearly panicking, their eyes wide as they looked at their colleagues for help. I'm Officer James Brennan, badge number 4872, the older officer said, his voice shaking. This is Officer Robert Taylor, badge number 5136. I'll get Captain Walker right away. While Brennan took out his radio to contact his superiors, Taylor took a few steps back, clearly trying to put some distance between himself and the situation. His face was pale, probably imagining his career going down the drain. See Captain Walker, Brennan said into the radio, his voice strained. We have a situation at Terminal B, near the department store. We need your presence immediately. He paused, swallowing. We just stopped the FBI director. There was a long pause before the radio broke with Captain Walker's panicked voice. What are you doing? I'll be there in 2 minutes. Do not do anything stupid. Richardson stood there, his expression unreadable, watching the two shaking officers before him. Years ago, early in his career as a young agent, he had experienced similar discrimination, stopped without cause, questioned, asked to prove he was not a threat. But today, as head of the FBI, he had the power to make this a lesson not just for these two officers but for the entire force. A minute and a half later, a middle-aged white man in an airport police uniform with captain's badges rushed onto the scene, followed by 2 other senior officers. He saw Richardson and immediately recognized the FBI director from briefings and news reports. Director Richardson, Captain Walker said, advancing with his hand outstretched. I'm Captain Thomas Walker, Morning Shift Airport Security Chief. I'm deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. Richardson did not shake hands. I'm not sure this is a misunderstanding, Captain Walker. Your officers stopped me without cause, refused to state the legal basis for my detention, and prepared to use force when I posed no threat. Walker swallowed, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew full well that he was facing a legal and public relations nightmare. Sir, I assure you that we will conduct a thorough investigation of this incident and... I know exactly what happened here, Captain, Richardson interrupted. I am a black man observing my surroundings, and to your officers, that automatically makes me a suspect. This is blatant racial bias, and it comes from people tasked with keeping all citizens safe, regardless of their skin color. Walker looked as if he had been punched in the gut. Officers Brennan and Taylor stood with their heads bowed, knowing their careers were at stake. I have no excuses, Chief, Walker said. We made a terrible mistake, and I take full responsibility as commander. Part 4, A Painful Lesson. The crowd around them had grown larger, many still filming. Among them, Richardson noticed a young woman with a press badge. She had probably been at the airport covering an entirely different story, but had now caught a much bigger one. We should continue this discussion in a more private setting, Richardson suggested, not wanting to turn the situation into a public spectacle, though he had every right to do so. Yes, Director. My office is not far from here, Walker said, clearly relieved to have the chance to leave the public eye. As they began to move, Officer Brennan, who had almost drawn his gun on the FBI director, suddenly spoke up. Director Richardson, I know this doesn't make up for what happened, but I'm truly sorry. I reacted based on preconceptions I didn't even realize I had. His voice shook, his face flushed with shame. Richardson paused, looking the officer straight in the eye. Officer Brennan, awareness is the first step. But I'm not the first person you've treated me like this, and unfortunately, I won't be the last. The difference is that I'm in a position of power to ensure that your actions have consequences. Many others don't have that privilege. They continued toward the airport security office, with Captain Walker leading the way and the two officers trailing behind. As they walked down a deserted hallway leading to the administrative area, the younger officer, Taylor, suddenly stopped and dropped to one knee. Chief Richardson, he said, his voice choked. I took an oath to protect and serve all people. Today I betrayed that oath. I am not worthy to wear this uniform. Richardson and the others paused, surprised by the younger officer's emotional response. Walker looked as if he wanted to disappear from the ground in shame, while Brennan stood there, his mouth slightly open. Stand up, Officer Taylor, Richardson said, his voice stern but no longer angry. Kneeling doesn't solve the problem. What we need is real change, in policy, in training, and most importantly, in the hearts and minds of law enforcement. Taylor slowly rose, his eyes red. I don't know what to do to fix this. Start by asking yourself, would you react the same way if I were a white man in a business suit? The honest answer to that question will tell you where to start. They continued on to Walker's office, where the door closed just as three men in sharp suits appeared in the hallway, FBI agents from the Atlanta office who had come to pick up their director. Part 5, Real Change. In Captain Walker's office, Richardson sat across from the three officers, his face calm but stern. The FBI agents had been told to wait outside. Richardson wanted to handle the situation on his own terms. Here's what's going to happen, Richardson said, his voice even and authoritative. I will not pursue criminal charges against your officers, Captain Walker, although I have every right to do so. Instead, I want to see real change at this airport police department. Walker nodded quickly. Whatever you ask, Director. We'll cooperate fully. First, I want a full report of all similar cases in the last 12 months, every stop, detention, and arrest based on suspicious behavior or fits the description. Breakdown by race, gender, and age. Brennan and Taylor looked at each other nervously, while Walker nodded reluctantly. Second, I want a new training program developed in consultation with the FBI Civil Rights Division. Every officer on your force will be required to complete this training. Yes, Director, Walker said, his expression serious. And finally, Richardson said, looking directly at Brennan and Taylor, these two officers will be assigned to work with our community outreach program for the next 3 months. They will work directly with minority communities, listening to their experiences with law enforcement. Brennan looked like she wanted to protest but kept quiet, while Taylor actually nodded, seemingly grateful for the chance to redeem himself. I'm not here to end anyone's career, Richardson said, his voice softening. I've spent 3 decades in law enforcement, and I know most officers are good people with good intentions. But good intentions aren't enough when unconscious bias affects how we treat others.